And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So in this tutorial we'll be taking a step back from constantly using pointers and let's talk a little bit about threading. So let's start off with what exactly is a thread. Well, your application can run with multiple threads. So when you have a threaded application, that means you can maybe execute two things, not quite at the same time, but it feels like it's at the same time with how fast generally your CPU is. For example, let's say you need to download content behind the scenes while the user does something on the app. For example, let's say your YouTube, and the user clicks the download button, but they want to watch a different video while that thing is downloading. Well, then while it downloads, that would be a thread. The download would be a thread. And while they watch another stream, that would be also a thread. That will allow your user to do multiple things at once, or your application to be able to do multiple things at once. Or that's how it looks. Generally, it's not quite at the same time, but it's usually such a fast switch that you don't notice the difference. So basically, whenever a thread is not being used, that will allow a different thread to start being used as well. So this allows your application to run much faster. Generally, we don't need to go too deep into threads, but that's just a general example. So let's create a basic function here that does not use any threads. And we can say void something. And this something will be just a normal function that loops and runs something. Let's create a global scope variable, boolean run, and we just make this true. Or let's make, there you can go, while run, and you can see out hello world. Now this will just create an infinite loop, and let's just see an example of this. Now if we do something, or when we do something, it will just start executing that. And we will never really get to this std cin, so getting user input dot get. So let's say we want to run that while loop until we get user input. Now when we do this, and we run this, you'll notice we just get a bunch of hello worlds. In fact, if I were to open up a little example here, go htop. So this right here is my CPUs. And let's view how the CPU usage looks, just for a fun fact, while we run this. And you'll notice the CPUs jumped incredibly high. And we can't do anything here either. Now where a thread comes in, it will make it easier for us to do something here, and generally it could maybe help with the CPU usage. So let's turn this into a threaded function, because we still can't get here where we can just get user input. So if I were to do this, you'll notice we get user input here, and if I press enter, it will cancel, or it will finish the function. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to get user input, and then once we get user input, it will stop running this do something here. So let's go here and say hashtag include thread, and this will enable threading for us. Then I'm just going to say using namespace, because this is a very long namespace and I'm not going to type it over and over again. So std literals chronoliterals. So this is just so we can sleep the thread for a second or so, just so we can get to where we need to. Now each thread has its own unique ID. So when you spawn a thread to run something, it will have its own unique ID, which you can later on modify if needed. So if you need to work with a specific thread, you can use this ID to work with it. So we can just maybe see out so we can get an example of it. Thread ID, and we can just say std this thread, so it will get the current thread, and then get ID, so we'll get the ID of this current thread. Then here, while we're running, we can do that, And we can just say std, and in this thread, so this is whenever we want to work with this current thread, sleep for, and let's just sleep for 1 second. So this will sleep for 1 second before it continues on this thread. This will give time for other threads to work as well. Then here we can say std thread worker, and this is just a worker to do something for us. It's a thread, and we can just put this function here without parentheses, because parentheses will try and execute a function, and this will put this function on a thread it can run whenever it has times. So what will happen now is this thread will start spawning, and it will create a bunch of loops that will need to run. So this while loop will run. Then once we put an input here, because nothing after this will execute, because this thread will spawn and will execute this function, it will get here and will wait for our input while this thread is running in the background. Once we get our input, we want to stop this from running, so we can just go run and make that equal to false. So run is equal to false. And then we need to say worker.join. And this will wait for the thread to finish executing before continuing to the rest of the program. Because if you just leave a thread open like that, it can cause a bunch of errors which we don't need to get into right now. And in here we can just say, so let's go over it again. So we create a thread, and this thread will run. It's very easy in C++. So we'll run this thread and we'll start executing this function, which will just continuously say hello world. Then here we are saying try and get a user input, and generally this blocks us. So if we were to just remove this thread here, and let's just remove everything that contains thread by going like this, because you don't have to do a bunch of things to compile yet. So when we do this, we can expect that we won't get the C out here, because it's going to try and get user input first. So I first need to do user input. When I press enter, it will say finished. So it will first wait for this, and that's generally how it goes. Same with a thread. We start a thread, and it will run this function, but it will never go past this until we actually do this cin.get. Now let's run this, and to run it you need to add a special flag. So g++ -lp thread, and in your file -o output, and then we can just run this output. Now it will every 1 second run this hello world for us, and here's the thread ID. So you can see it only spawned one thread because there's only one thread ID. And now every second it puts hello world here until I press enter. Once I press enter, this cin.get will stop executing because it got what I wanted. It got an input. It will set run to false, which will make this no longer execute. It will wait for this thread to finish doing whatever it was doing. Then it will print out finished, and it will stop the program. And working with threads is really this simple. It's just creating a worker thread, telling it to do something, and then that thing can be done in the background while you're doing something. Of course, you didn't have to put like wait 1 second here. That's an optional feature. But if we do this, and we get our hello world, but you can't really see anything happening until we press enter, and then it says finished. That's the basics of threads. We might go a little bit deeper into this in the future, but as you can see, working with threads are really simple. It allows you to do multiple things at the same time, not literally the same time. It has a little bit of a difference there, but it feels like the same time. And it is super easy, especially in C++ to use. And that's that. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.